This extended demo will showcase additional capabilities of Pellustro from both a participant and manager's point of view, as well as including the third perspective of an assessment administrator. First, we will walk through the user experience of participating in a DCAM assessment using the Pellustro software, where participants are required to score DCAM sub-capabilities and provide evidence and comments. Often, formal assessments may be configured to mandate that users answer all questions before their submissions are accepted. Then, if this feature was enabled when the assessment was launched, participants are able to opt out of answering in situations where they aren't quite sure what level their organization is at, or simply don't understand what they're being asked to score, by toggling the skip scoring switch for that sub-capability. This option communicates to the assessment manager that this user has skipped that particular question and allows the manager to then decide whether or not to take an action. For instance, following up with the participant about their reason for abstaining and potentially providing additional explanation that would enable the participant to provide a score. Another feature that can be set up before the assessment is launched is the option for users to provide additional inputs. The two main types of inputs are evidence and comment. The evidence input can be used to justify the scoring of a particular sub-capability. Instead of directly uploading sensitive information from the client's environment to the cloud, users provide the URL to the relevant document, usually stored in a shared folder within the client environment. The comment input can be used to record the participant's opinion on either the scoring given or on that specific sub-capability and the state of that capability within the organization. It can also be a way to note something for yourself to remember in the future. For example, if you scored 3 but are in the process of achieving a level 4, you might include the estimated date of improvement. Additional input can also be provided on the level of the overall assessment. If you have comments to document about the assessment or additional evidence, it can be added via the Add Input button at the top. Depending on the settings chosen by your administrators, the additional input might be mandatory. In the DCAM rubric, a score of 4 means that you have developed or defined that sub-capability, and therefore managers might mandate evidence input for all levels greater than 4. For example, if that is the case and you score 5 without providing evidence, the Add Input button will turn red with an asterisk, indicating there is a mandatory input you need to insert. You will not be able to submit the assessment until all mandatory fields are completed. Let's see what setting up input fields and skip scoring looks like from an assessment manager's point of view. Let's say we want to set up a field called comment, which takes an input of free-form text. We can then make submitting a comment mandatory in the case of certain scores. For instance, if you score a 1, say a little bit more about it. Why do you think so? Or otherwise, if you score a 6, which means your organization is constantly measuring and optimizing that sub-capability. Back that up with some additional information. We can also then add an evidence field with an input of URL and make it mandatory for certain scores along the same lines. When the manager is either initially launching or in the process of maintaining the assessment, they have the option to allow users to provide additional inputs, a feature which can be accessed through the second tab in the assessment section, User Input. These additional inputs can be various data types: free-form text, URL, date, number, money, or identifier. In the DCAM case, users usually provide either a comment as free-form text or document evidence via a URL. The other feature of user input the assessment manager has control over is requiring that all capabilities be scored before a final submission is accepted. This can be toggled by this switch at the top. However, if providing a response is made mandatory, the manager can also choose to allow participants to opt out of questions when they aren't quite sure about their answer, or simply don't understand what they're being asked, by toggling Enable Skip Score. That way, the assessment manager is aware that a user has skipped that capability scoring, which allows them to then decide whether or not to take an action. For instance, following up with the participant about their reason for abstaining and potentially providing additional explanation that would enable the participant to provide a score. Now let's see Pellustro's additional functionality from the third perspective of an assessment administrator. As admin, Pellustro allows you to easily create your own new classifications. For example, let's say I was making a classification representing the organizational structure of this bank. I can establish a new classification called Demo Function by clicking the Add Classification button at the top right. I can then tab over and begin adding nodes, creating the highest level branches, global businesses, and global functions, using this Add Node button here. After that, it's easy to go on and further specify whatever subdivisions I'd like. In this case, for example, retail banking, by adding a node and then specifying the parent global businesses. Pellustro allows an assessment administrator to set up any number of classifications, so that participants in an assessment can be labeled and sorted into whatever relevant categories might be valuable during the analysis of the assessment results. One category that's almost always used is organizational taxonomy, which groups users by their position in the organizational hierarchy of the firm. All classifications are customized according to the client. In the case of this fictional bank, you can see how the structure of the organization is represented in the function label. On the highest level, the firm is split into the two branches, global functions and global businesses. Then, global businesses is further broken down into its constituent parts, retail banking, commercial banking, and so on. This then allows me as either the manager or admin to look at the average aggregate scores of each division or organizational units while interpreting the assessment responses. Another common classification labels participants by their roles in the organization's data management. This becomes useful during the analysis of the results by providing a reality check in the more accurate scoring by those directly involved in data management. We looked at how to set up custom classifications, so now we can go over to the second aspect of the admin point of view, user management capabilities. Adding new users to an assessment and assigning them to different roles and labels. I can create a user by clicking on this Add User button at the top left. Let's say I want to add a new user, Natalie Kleiner, to the assessment. I would need to fill in first name, last name, organizational email, and then specify their user group, either participant or admin, which would determine what role they play in the assessment and what features they have access to. And then I would go through and assign this user to any relevant classifications. You can edit any particular user at any point if you'd like to update something or assign them to a new classification. These classification labels are stored and displayed in the table of all existing users located under the User Management tab. Instead of creating each user manually, I can also export this table as a spreadsheet in order to more conveniently bulk add additional users in a platform like Excel, and then re-upload this updated sheet to Pellustro. Now we can move on to the third main aspect of the admin perspective, assessment models. As assessment administrator, I can either set up my own model from scratch, or otherwise simply modify the standard DCAM model to fit my organization's specific needs, usually the more convenient approach. Here we can see the pre-existing EDM Council DCAM assessment model has properties, scoring, and model structure based on the guidelines of the EDM Council. From here it's possible to add new scores or subscores to the already defined 1 through 6, or to add a question anywhere in the model framework using the Add question at the top left. By default, this will create a new sub-capability, but I can adjust the level by editing the enumeration at the right. For example, many clients opt to expand on the 8 core components included in the DCAM framework. One common thing to do is create something like a privacy component using best industry practices and the organization's own privacy policies to define a new set of capabilities related to data security. Pellustro then saves this in the system as a new version of the model in order to avoid interfering with any previous assessments that use the original model structure. Of course, if we start using a new or updated version, it's crucial that we're still able to track the progress of the organization's data management capabilities over time. Pellustro allows for this via the model mapping feature, by means of which an admin can set up an equivalence between two models. This preserves the ability to compare results from recent assessments to those done in the past, which may have used a different scoring metric or question framework. It also makes it easier for those developing new models to orient themselves with respect to the DCAM baseline and previous assessments. Finally, as an admin, I can also manage certain license settings. Under Configuration, I can toggle various features of the general assessment setup. For example, whether or not participants are able to view the response analytics. Additionally, by going to the Notifications menu, I can specify exactly which users are notified about what events in great detail.